Stop right there. The final reckoning of a tech titan. He had it all. A billion-dollar empire and a dazzling fiancée. He was about to seal his future until she burst in. The woman he swore he had buried 5 years ago. And she didn't carry a gift, but a red folder that was about to cost him everything. If you believe justice always finds its way, even if it takes 5 years, hit like. Your support fuels our fight for the truth. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to see how arrogance always falls to silent strategy. The masquerade at the plaza. The beginning of the end. The chandeliers inside the Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom didn't just sparkle. They seemed to judge anyone whose net worth was less than 8 figures. For Julian Thorne, CEO of Thorne Logistics, tonight wasn't just a party. It was a coronation. He adjusted the cuffs of his custom Italian tuxedo, glancing at his reflection in the dark window overlooking Central Park. At 42, Julian fit the role of the master of the universe perfectly. Perfectly coiffed salt and pepper hair, a jawline that looked sculpted from granite, and a smile that could charm a snake out of a basket. Darling, stop admiring yourself. You're making the waiters jealous. A voice purred by his side. Julian turned to see Tiffany St. Clair. She was 24, a former runway model, and, at the moment, the most expensive accessory Julian owned. She wore a liquid silver dress that clung to her figure like a second skin, and on her finger flashed a 10-carat diamond that cost more than the GDP of a small island nation. I'm not admiring myself, Tiff, Julian lied smoothly, taking her waist. I'm looking at the future. See that man over there? The one with the cane? Tiffany narrowed her perfectly made-up eyes. The old guy who looks like he smells like mothballs? That's Arthur Sterling, Julian whispered, his voice trembling with greed. He controls the shipping lanes in the Pacific. Tonight, after we announce our engagement, he signs the merger. Thorne Logistics goes global. And you, my dear, become the Queen of New York. Tiffany giggled, the sound light and ethereal, devoid of any real substance. I just want everyone to see the ring. My cousin Jessica is here, and she's been bragging about her husband's promotion to regional manager. I can't wait to see her face when she realizes she's breathing the same air as a billionaire's fiancé. Julian chuckled, guiding her toward the center of the room. He loved this about Tiffany. She was simple. She liked shiny things. She liked attention. And she didn't ask questions about business. She was the polar opposite of Elara. Elara. The name flickered across his mind like a blown bulb. His ex-wife. The woman who had supported him when he sold electronics out of the back of a van in Queens. The woman who had worked double shifts at a coffee shop to pay for his first business license. She was the simple, practical Elara. She wore comfortable shoes and worried about retirement plans. She read contracts. She asked questions. She was boring. Getting rid of her 5 years ago had been the smartest move of his life. Well, getting rid of her was a harsh way to put it. Julian preferred to think of it as moving on. He had handled the divorce quietly. He told her the business was failing, that they were bankrupt, and needed to separate to protect her credit. He presented the papers. She cried. She signed, and he gave her a small payoff, enough to buy an apartment in New Jersey, and dismissed her. He hadn't seen her since. He assumed she was clipping coupons somewhere in the suburbs, probably married to a plumber. Ladies and gentlemen, the master of ceremonies' voice boomed over the speakers, pulling Julian back to the glorious present. Please give a warm welcome to your host, the CEO of Thorne Logistics, Mr. Julian Thorne. The applause was deafening. Julian strode onto the small stage, with Tiffany slightly behind him, to ensure the spotlight hit her diamonds directly. Julian raised his hands for silence, basking in the adoration. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Tonight is a night of new beginnings, As many of you know, Thorn Logistics has been my life's work, but a king needs a queen." He turned and held out a hand to Tiffany. The crowd sighed. "I am pleased to announce that not only are we finalizing the merger with Sterling Global tonight," Julian said, nodding to Arthur Sterling in the front row, "but I am also announcing my engagement to the love of my life, the future Mrs. Thorne, Tiffany St. Clair." The room erupted. Waiters uncorked fresh bottles of Dom Perignon. Tiffany posed, flashing the ring for the photographers. Arthur Sterling nodded his approval, raising his glass. "To the happy couple," Arthur shouted, his voice gravelly but commanding. "To the merger," Julian yelled, feeling invincible. He took a sip of his champagne, the bubbles fresh and cold. He looked at the sea of faces. Bankers, politicians, celebrities. They all envied him. He had won the game of life. He was about to lean down to kiss Tiffany for the cameras, when the energy in the room shifted. It wasn't a sound. It was an absence of sound. From the back, near the grand entrance, the applause didn't taper off naturally. It was choked. The silence spread like a contagion, moving row by row toward the stage. People stopped clapping. They stopped drinking. They turned. They craned their necks. Julian frowned, lowering his glass. "What is it? Did the catering cart catch fire?" Tiffany stood on her tiptoes. "I think someone crashed the party. Look at that dress." Julian squinted against the stage lights. The double doors at the other end of the ballroom, usually guarded by 2 large security personnel, were wide open. The guards were nowhere to be seen. Standing in the doorway was a solitary figure. She wore red. Not just red. It was a crimson, so deep and vibrant it looked like a fresh wound against the cream and gold decor of the plaza. The dress was structured, architectural, with a high neck and a dangerously low-cut back. It was the kind of dress that didn't ask for attention. It demanded submission. Julian blinked. The silhouette was familiar, but the posture was wrong. The woman he remembered hunched her shoulders, trying to make herself smaller. This woman stood tall, with the stillness of a predator. She began to walk. The click of her heels on the marble floor echoed through the silent room. Click, click, click. As she moved into the chandelier light, Julian felt the blood drain from his face, pooling somewhere near his expensive Italian leather shoes. The messy brown bun was gone, replaced by sleek, jet-black hair cut into a sharp, asymmetrical bob that framed a face of pale porcelain skin. The glasses were gone, revealing eyes that were cold, hard, and penetrating blue. "My God," someone whispered in the front row. "Who is that?" Julian's throat went dry. He knew who it was, but his brain refused to process it. It was like seeing a ghost. Only this ghost wore Valentino and looked ready to burn the haunted house to the ground. "Elara," Julian whispered, the name escaping his lips like a curse. Elara Vance, or as the guest list would have read had she been on it. Mrs. Elara Thorne kept her eyes fixed on the stage. She could feel the weight of 300 pairs of eyes on her. 5 years ago, this would have sent her into nausea-inducing anxiety. 5 years ago, she was the woman who apologized to the table when she bumped it. But 5 years is a long time, long enough to learn, long enough to heal, and more importantly, long enough to hire the best forensic accountants in the tri-state area. She gripped the red leather legal folder in her left hand. It felt heavy, not with paper, but with the destruction she was about to unleash. "Excuse me," a young waiter murmured, stepping out of her way as if she were royalty. She did not acknowledge him. Her attention was entirely on the man standing on the stage. Julian. He looked older, she noticed. The gray hair was new, probably carefully cultivated to look distinguished. He looked terrified. Good. And next to him, the girl. Tiffany. Elara had read the file. 24 years old. Likes ponies and Instagram. Collateral damage. Elara felt a pang of pity for her, but it was fleeting. If you play in the mud with pigs, you get dirty. Elara reached the center of the dance floor. The silence was absolute now. Even the kitchen staff had peered out of the swinging doors to watch. Security! Julian's voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again, lower this time. Security! We have an intruder! No one moved. Elara stopped 10 feet from the stage. She looked at Julian, tilting her head slightly. "Hello, Julian," she said. Her voice was not loud, but in the perfect acoustics of the ballroom, it reached the back row. It was soft, rich, and utterly devoid of warmth. "You didn't send me an invitation. I assumed it got lost in the mail." Julian laughed, a nervous, shaky sound. "Elara? Is that you? My God, you look different." He turned to the crowd, spreading his hands in a gesture of helpless confusion. "Everyone, I'm sorry. This is my ex-wife. She's been going through a very difficult time mentally since the divorce. I think she went off her medication." A murmur of sympathy rippled through the crowd. "Ah, the crazy ex. A classic tragedy." Tiffany took a step forward, emboldened by Julian's explanation. She looked Elara up and down with a sneer. "Honey, this is a private event. The soup kitchen is 3 blocks over. You can't just barge in here in a rented dress and ruin my engagement." Elara shifted her gaze to Tiffany. She didn't sneer. She didn't frown. She looked at Tiffany with the clinical coldness of a surgeon examining a tumor. "Rented?" Elara repeated softly. "How cute. This is a custom Alexander McQueen, and I didn't rent it. I bought it with the dividends from my stock portfolio, the one Julian thinks doesn't exist." Julian's smile faltered. "Elara, stop. You're embarrassing yourself. Please leave, and I'll cut you a check for the trouble. I know money is tight for you." Is it?" Elara asked. She took a step closer to the stage. "Is money tight, Julian? Or is that what you told me 5 years ago when you forced me to sign those papers in that tiny, dark office in Queens? The business is failing, Elara. We have to divorce to save you from the debt collectors, Elara." Julian's face hardened. It was the truth. "I built this empire from the ashes after you left." "I didn't leave," Elara said, her voice rising enough to cut the air like a whip. "I was pushed. You told me it was for my own good. You told me you loved me too much to drag me down with you." She paused, looking around the room. She made eye contact with Arthur Sterling, the billionaire investor. "Mr. Sterling," Elara said, nodding. "I admire your work with Pacific Cargo. Very impressive. I imagine you're a man who values due diligence." Arthur Sterling frowned, leaning on his cane. "I am. Who exactly are you?" "She's a nobody," Julian yelled, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. "Arthur, ignore her. She's a bitter woman looking for money. Security. Where the hell is security?" "Security works for Thorne Logistics," Elara said calmly, "which creates a small conflict of interest, wouldn't you say? Considering the documents I hold." She lifted the red folder. Julian walked down the steps of the stage, moving aggressively into her personal space. He loomed over her, using his physical size to intimidate, a tactic that used to work wonders with the old Elara. "Get out!" he hissed, low enough for the microphone not to catch it. "Get out now, or I will destroy you. I'll bury you in so many lawsuits you won't be able to afford to breathe. You signed the divorce papers. It's over. You have nothing." Elara did not flinch. She smelled his cologne, sandalwood, and expensive lies. She smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing Julian had ever seen. "I signed the papers you gave me, Julian," she whispered. "But you were always so cheap. You didn't want to pay a real lawyer to process them, did you? You gave them to your cousin, Vinny, to file at the courthouse to save yourself $500. Julian froze. "Vinny," Elara continued, "who had a gambling problem. Vinny, who took your filing fee and went to Atlantic City instead. Vinny, who never actually filed the divorce decree with the state of New York. No, he stammered. No, I have the decree. It's in my safe. You have a piece of paper with a stamp, Alara said. A fake stamp. I checked the registry, Julian. I checked it 5 years ago, and then I checked it every week for 5 years. She took a step back, raising her voice so the whole room could hear. You see, everyone here believes they are at an engagement party for Julian Thorne and his mistress. Gasps rippled through the room. Tiffany looked ready to slap her. But you cannot be engaged, Julian, Alara said, opening the red folder and pulling out a certified document with a gold seal. Because bigamy is illegal in the state of New York, and as of this morning, according to the county clerk, you and I have been happily married for 15 years. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It was the kind of silence that precedes an explosion. Arthur Sterling was the first to speak. He stood up slowly, his cane thudding onto the floor. Julian! He barked, his voice grave. Is this true? Julian spun, his hands shaking. Of course not. It's an administrative error, a mistake. Vinny told me it was done. I have the papers. Vinny is currently serving 3 years for fraud, Alara interjected softly. He wasn't very good at forging court seals, apparently, but he was very good at taking your money. Tiffany grabbed Julian's arm, her nails digging into his tuxedo jacket. Julian, what is she talking about? Are you married? You told me it was history. You told me she was a leech you paid off. She is history, Julian yelled, losing his composure completely. He pointed a trembling finger at Alara. Witch. You knew. You knew for 5 years and didn't say anything. I waited, Alara corrected him. I watched. I saw you take the designs I drew on napkins, the logistics software architecture, and claim it was your genius idea. I watched you build Thorne Logistics using my inheritance seed capital, which you claimed was lost in bankruptcy. I watched you buy yachts and penthouses while I lived in a studio in Jersey. She paused, looking around the room. She made eye contact with Arthur Sterling, the investor. I wanted to speak, she admitted, but my lawyer advised me against it. She told me, wait until he makes a move that requires absolute legal certainty. Wait until he puts the rope around his own neck. Alara pointed to the banner hanging over the stage. Thorne Logistics and Sterling Global, a merger of giants. This merger, Alara said, turning to Mr. Sterling. I read the prospectus. It requires Julian Thorne to put 51% of his personal shares in Thorne Logistics as collateral. Is that correct? Arthur Sterling nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing. It is. Well, Alara said, flipping to the second page of her document. That presents a problem, because since there was no divorce, and since there was no prenuptial agreement, half of everything acquired during the marriage is marital property. She looked at Julian with an expression of mockery and pity. And since you built the entire company during our marriage, Julian, you do not own 100% of Thorne Logistics. You own 50%. The realization hit the room like a shockwave. If he only owns 50%, Arthur Sterling muttered. He does not have the authority to pledge 50% as collateral. Exactly, Alara said, which means this merger is founded on fraud. You're lying! Julian screamed. He lunged for the folder in her hand, desperate to tear the papers to shreds. Give me that! But before he could touch her, a man in a dark suit stepped out from the crowd. He moved with a burst of speed, intercepting Julian and twisting his arm behind his back with ease. Julian yelped in pain, bent over. Let go of me! Who are you? The man released him and flashed a badge. Detective Miller, NYPD and I suggest you do not assault the witness, Mr. Thorne. Witness, Julian stammered, rubbing his shoulder. Witness to what? The investigation into tax evasion and securities fraud, Alara answered for the detective. You see, Julian, when you file taxes as a single man for 5 years, but you are actually married, The IRS gets very upset, especially when you are concealing millions of dollars in offshore accounts that, technically, your wife co-owns. Tiffany let out a sharp shriek. Tax evasion, fraud, Julian, you said you were clean, you said you were untouchable. I am, Julian insisted, his eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit, an ally, anything. This is a setup. She's framing me. Arthur, please, you know me. Know me, we've played golf. Arthur Sterling looked at Julian with pure disgust. I do business with men, Julian, not with children who can't even handle their own divorce papers. The deal is off. No, Julian cried. You can't. We signed the letter of intent. And I'm shredding it, Sterling said. He looked at Alara. Mrs. Thorne, or should I say, Ms. Vance, I apologize for this farce. Thank you, Mr. Sterling, Alara said with an elegant nod. But we're not finished yet. She turned back to Julian. He looked small now. The master of the universe had shrunk to the size of a frightened, cheating husband. You see, Julian, Alara said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. The IRS investigation is bad. The failed merger is bad. But the real problem is the spousal consent clause in the original incorporation documents of Thorne Logistics. Julian's eyes widened. He remembered. Hidden deep in the original paperwork, when they were young and in love, they had added a clause, a romantic gesture. Decisions regarding the sale or restructuring of the company require the unanimous consent of both spouses. I never approved you acting as CEO, Alara said. Technically, every decision you've made in the last 5 years is voidable. The Plaza Hotel ballroom had transformed from a coronation to the scene of a social suicide crime. The silence had been broken, replaced by the frantic clicking of camera shutters and the hushed, excited whispers of 300 guests, witnessing the most spectacular downfall in New York society history. Julian Thorne stood alone in the center of the dance floor. The spotlight was still on him, but it no longer felt like adoration. It felt like an interrogation lamp. He turned to Tiffany, his hands trembling as he reached for her. Tiffany, darling, listen to me. It's a technicality. It's a paperwork mistake. I have the best lawyers in the city. We can fix this. Just stand by me. Tiffany St. Clair looked at his hand as if it were covered in mud. The adoration that was in her eyes 5 minutes ago, the look that said, I'm marrying a billionaire, was gone. It was replaced by the cold, hard calculation of a woman who had just realized her investment had plummeted to zero. Slowly, she withdrew her arm. A technicality? Tiffany repeated, her voice screechy. Julian, you just lost the merger. You're under IRS investigation, and you're apparently still married to her. She vaguely pointed to Alara, who watched the scene with a serene, almost bored expression. It doesn't matter, Julian pleaded, sweat dripping down his temple, ruining his makeup. I still have the company. I still have the penthouse. I can buy you another ring, a bigger one. Tiffany laughed, but it was a cruel, hollow sound. She looked at the 10-carat diamond on her finger, the ring she had been flaunting all night. Then she looked at Alara. Hey, Tiffany shouted to Alara. Is that true, about the assets? Does he really only own half? Alara didn't shout. She simply nodded once, calm and precise. Technically, less than half once the IRS imposes the tax fraud penalties. And since the penthouse was purchased 2 years ago with company funds labeled as business expenses, it is currently being frozen by the injunction I filed today at 4:55 p.m. Tiffany's eyes widened. She looked at Julian. You don't even own the apartment? I do, I will, Julian stammered. Tiff, don't do this. I love you. You love having a trophy, Tiffany spat. She started pulling the ring off her finger. For a second, Julian thought she was going to hand it back, a noble gesture of ending things. Instead, she dropped the ring into her handbag and snapped it shut. I'm keeping this, Tiffany announced. "Consider it severance pay for wasting 2 years of my youth." "You can't take that!" Julian lunged for her bag. "That's a $500,000 ring!" Tiffany backed away, and 2 of the security guards, who had been listening to Ilara's earlier speech about who truly paid their salaries, stepped between them. They blocked Julian, crossing their arms. "Don't touch me," Tiffany hissed. She smoothed her silver dress, regained her composure, and turned to the crowd. "I just want to say I had no idea. I'm a victim here too." She walked away, her heels clicking rapidly as she headed for the exit, not looking back once. Julian watched her go, his chest heaving. He felt stripped. He turned to Arthur Sterling, but the billionaire was already talking to his assistants, no doubt instructing them to torch every contract with the Thorne name. Finally, Julian turned to Ilara. She hadn't moved. She stood like a statue of retribution in her crimson dress. "Are you happy?" Julian snapped, his voice broken. "You ruined my life. You destroyed everything I built. Why? Because I left you? Because I wanted to be happy?" Ilara walked slowly toward him. The crowd parted for her. She stopped inches away from him, close enough for him to see the fine lines of determination around her eyes. "You didn't just leave me, Julian," she said softly. "If you had just left me, I would have cried, healed, and moved on. I loved you enough to let you go." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper only he could hear. "But you didn't just leave. You manipulated me. You made me believe I was crazy for suspecting you cheated. You made me believe we were bankrupt, so you could hide the money. You had me sign papers while medicated for the depression you caused. You stole my dignity, Julian. You stole my trust in reality." She straightened, her voice returning to normal. "I am not destroying what you built, Julian. I am reclaiming what I paid for." She turned to Detective Miller, who waited patiently next to the stage. "Detective," Ilara said, "I believe Mr. Thorne is a flight risk. He has a pilot's license and a private jet, fueled at Teterboro Airport, or our private jet, I should say." Detective Miller nodded. "Mr. Thorne, I'm going to need you to come with us. We have some questions regarding your tax filings for the years 2020 through 2024. "I'm not going anywhere," Julian shouted, backing away. "This is insane. You can't arrest me at my own party." "Actually," Miller said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "We can." As the cold steel snapped around Julian's wrists, camera flashes went off frantically. The image of Julian Thorne, tuxedo disheveled, face red with rage, handcuffed in the middle of the Plaza Ballroom, would be on the front page of the New York Post tomorrow morning. Ilara watched him being led away. She didn't smile. She didn't cheer. She simply pulled a business card from her red folder and handed it to the confused master of ceremonies. "Here," she said. "Call a taxi for Mr. Sterling and tell the staff to keep serving champagne. I'm paying the bill tonight. It is, after all, a celebration." 2. The dawn of the new empire. 6 months later, the sun rose over Manhattan, oblivious to the chaos it illuminated. But inside the glass and steel headquarters of Thorne Logistics on Wall Street, the storm was just beginning. Employees huddled in cubicles, whispering. The news had broken overnight. The video of Julian's arrest was trending on Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube. "Knock a Thorne down" was the #1 hashtag. At 9 o'clock sharp, the elevator doors to the executive floor opened. Staff expected to see lawyers. They expected to see police. Instead, they saw Ilara. She no longer wore the red dress. She wore a sleek, sharp navy pantsuit that cost more than most cars. Her hair was pulled back into a neat bun. She carried a briefcase in one hand and a Starbucks cup in the other. She walked past the reception desk. The receptionist, a young woman named Sarah, who had been hired by Julian specifically for her looks, rather than her typing speed, gaped at her. "Excuse me?" Sarah stammered. "You can't go in here. Mr. Thorne's office is restricted." Elara didn't stop walking. "Mr. Thorne is currently being processed at the criminal courthouse downtown, Sarah. He won't be coming in today, or this week, or if my calculations are correct, ever again." Elara pushed open the glass double doors of the CEO's office. It was a sanctuary to Julian's ego. A massive mahogany desk, a panoramic view of the harbor, and a portrait of himself hanging on the wall. Elara walked over to the portrait. She stared at it for a moment, then calmly unhooked it and placed it on the floor, facing the wall. She walked around the desk and sat down in the high-backed leather chair. It was comfortable. Too comfortable. It felt like a throne. "Mrs. Thorne?" Elara looked up. Standing in the doorway was Marcus Kane, the CFO of Thorne Logistics. Marcus was a shifty man, the kind of person who knew where all the bodies were buried because he'd handed Julian the shovel. He looked pale. "Mr. Kane," Elara said pleasantly, "come in. Close the door." Marcus closed the door but did not sit down. He fiddled with his tie. "Look, Elara, Mrs. Thorne, I had no idea about the marital situation. Julian told me." "Sit down, Marcus," Elara commanded. Her voice was not loud, but it had a steel edge that made his knees buckle. He sat. "I know you knew," Elara said, opening a briefcase and pulling out a tablet. "I know you helped him set up the shell companies in the Cayman Islands, Blue Horizon Consulting, Vertex Holdings, and my favorite, Single Man LLC. Marcus swallowed. I was just following orders. He's the CEO. He was the CEO, Elara corrected. As of this morning, the board of directors received my emergency motion. Given Julian's arrest and the fraud investigation, they have appointed me interim CEO pending asset division. She slid a piece of paper across the desk. This is a letter of resignation, Marcus. It cites personal reasons. Marcus looked at the paper, then back at her. His eyes narrowed slightly. And if I don't sign it, then I hand this over to the FBI, Elara said, tapping the tablet. I have emails, Marcus. Emails where you explicitly discuss how to conceal the Sterling merger profits to avoid paying dividends to minor shareholders. That's federal prison time. Julian may be the face of the fraud, but you were the mechanic. Marcus stared at her. In that moment, he realized the plain, quiet wife he had ignored at company Christmas parties 5 years ago was gone. This woman was a shark. He picked up the pen and signed the paper with a trembling hand. Good choice, Elara said. Now get out. Security will escort you. As Marcus fled the office, Elara swiveled the chair to look out the window. She had no time for gloating. She had a company to save. The desk phone buzzed. She pressed the speaker button. Mrs. Thorne. Sarah's voice came through, sounding terrified. Mr. Thorne is here. He's in the lobby. Security is trying to restrain him, but he's yelling. Elara sighed. She had expected this. Julian had likely made bail. Let him up, Elara said. Let's get this over with. 3 minutes later, Julian Thorne burst into the office. He looked a wreck. He wore the same tuxedo from the night before, but his shirt was unbuttoned, his tie was gone, and he smelled of stale jail coffee and desperation. You! He shouted, pointing a finger at her. Get out of my chair! Get out of my office! Elara did not flinch. She rested her elbows on the desk and folded her hands. Good morning, Julian. How is the detention cell? I hear the mattresses are terrible. I posted bail, Julian sneered, marching toward the desk. $2 million, and now I'm going to sue you for everything you own. Impersonating a corporate officer, trespassing. You are finished. I'm the interim CEO, Julian, Elara said calmly. Approved by the board at 8 a.m. You see, when the stock price drops 40% overnight because the CEO is arrested for bigamy and fraud, the board tends to panic. I offered them stability. Stability? Julian slammed his hands on the desk, leaning over her. You don't know the first thing about logistics. You were a receptionist when I met you. You are nothing without me. Elara stood up. She wasn't tall, but in that moment she seemed to tower over him. I wasn't just a receptionist, Julian. I was the one who fixed your spreadsheets when you couldn't do the math. I was the one who negotiated vendor contracts when you were too scared to pick up the phone. I ran this company from the shadows for years, while you took the credit. She picked up a remote and pointed to the large screen on the wall. It lit up, showing a complex flowchart of shipping routes and accounts. And I know about Project Anchor, she said. Julian froze. His face turned gray. Project Anchor, Elara continued. The illegal dumping of chemical waste into international waters to cut shipping costs for your clients. That's how you got the Sterling deal, wasn't it? You undercut the competition by breaking environmental laws. You can't prove that, Julian whispered. I don't have to, Elara said, because you kept the records. You are a narcissist, Julian. You keep records of everything to show how smart you are. I found the hard drive in the house safe. The combination was your birthday. You really are that predictable. Julian collapsed into one of the guest chairs. He put his head in his hands. The fight had left him. He realized, finally, that he wasn't dealing with a scorned woman. He was dealing with a superior intellect that he had foolishly underestimated. What do you want? He asked, his voice choked. You want the money? Take it. You want the house? Take it. Just don't release the Anchor files. That's 20 years in prison. Please, Elara, we were family once. Elara looked at him. She recalled the man she had married, the charming, ambitious dreamer. She searched for that man in his eyes, but all she saw was greed and fear. We were family, Elara nodded. But you killed that family, Julian. You killed it the day you looked at me and decided I wasn't bright enough for your new life. She pressed a button on the intercom. Security, Mr. Thorne is ready to leave, and please inform the New York Police Department that we have additional evidence to present regarding environmental crimes. Julian looked up, betrayal etched all over his face. You said, I thought we were negotiating. We are not negotiating, Julian, Elara said, sitting back in the leather chair. I am cleaning house. 3. The King's Downfall and the Earned Throne. 6 months had passed. The scandal was still the talk of New York, but the legal machinery moved with brutal efficiency. Elara sat in a conference room at the district attorney's office. The room smelled of stale coffee and floor wax. Across from her sat Detective Miller and the chief prosecutor, D.A. Reynolds. Mrs. Thorne, Reynolds began, organizing a stack of files. The evidence you provided regarding tax fraud and environmental violations is substantial. We have enough to put Julian away for a long time. But there is one complication. Elara raised an eyebrow. A complication? Julian is pleading innocence as to intent, Reynolds said. He claims he truly believed the divorce was final. He argues his cousin, Vinny, defrauded him. If the jury believes Julian was merely a victim of his cousin's incompetence, he could beat the bigamy and fraud charges. He'll only get the negligence charge. Elara frowned. He knew. He told me to sign the papers but never gave me a copy. He knew Vinny was unreliable. It was calculated denial. We know that, Miller interjected. But proving it in court is different. We need Vinny. Vinny is in prison, Elara said. He was released on parole 2 days ago, Reynolds said, and has gone underground. If Julian's lawyers contacted him, paid him off, Vinny could testify that Julian thought the divorce was real. That kills our fraud case. Elara tapped her fingers on the table. Vinny. Vincent Gambino. Julian's cousin. A small-time crook who always wanted to be important, but lacked the intelligence or the charm. I know where he is, Elara said suddenly. The prosecutor was startled. You do? We have the NYPD looking for him. Julian and Vinny had a hideout when they were kids, Elara explained. An old fishing cabin in the Catskill Mountains. It belonged to their grandfather. Julian hated it. Too many mosquitoes. But Vinny loved it. He fancied himself a rugged outdoorsman. Whenever Vinny got into trouble with loan sharks, he went to the cabin. "Can you take us there?" Miller asked. "I can give you the address," Ilara said, "but you might need me to go in. Vinny hates the police. He won't talk to you." But he always had a soft spot for me. It was true. In the early days, when Julian was too busy working to come home for dinner, Vinny sometimes stopped by with a pizza. He was a crook, yes, but he had felt bad for Ilara. He had seen how Julian treated her. 5 hours later, an unmarked SUV crunched down the gravel driveway of a dilapidated cabin deep in the upstate New York woods. Detective Miller turned off the engine. "Stay in the car, Mrs. Thorne. We'll check it out first." "He won't shoot," Ilara said, opening the door. "He's not violent. He's just a coward." She stepped out into the crisp mountain air. The cabin looked abandoned, but she saw a thin thread of smoke rising from the chimney. She climbed the rotting wooden steps and knocked on the door. "Vinny, it's Ilara." Silence. Then, the sound of a bolt sliding. The door opened, revealing a face that had aged 10 years in the last 5. Vinny had thinning hair, bad teeth, and eyes that darted nervously back and forth. "Ilara," he croaked. "What are you doing here? Did Julian send you?" "No," Ilara said. "Julian is trying to blame everything on you, Vinny. He's telling the feds you ripped him off, that you stole the filing money and lied about the divorce. He's going to let you take the fall for bigamy and fraud." Vinny's jaw dropped. "That rat. That dirty rat. I did what he told me to do." "I know," Ilara said gently. "Can I come in?" Vinny opened the door wider. The cabin was a mess of empty beer cans and instant noodle cups. Vinny paced the small room, agitated. "He told me not to file it," Vinny shouted, waving his hands. He said, "Vinny, just stamp it with a fake stamp. I don't want to pay alimony." He said if we filed it for real, the judge would force him to split the business assets because the company was taking off. He wanted to keep it all. "Did he pay you?" Ilara asked. "He gave me $5,000, Vinny sneered. $5,000 to risk a felony, and now he's throwing me to the lions." "He's going to send you back to prison, Vinny," Ilara said, "unless you help me." "How?" "The district attorney is outside," Ilara said, pointing to the window. "If you testify against Julian, if you tell them he ordered you to falsify the divorce, they'll give you immunity for the forgery. You'll walk free. Julian will fall." Vinny looked out the window, then at Ilara. He saw the fear and determination in her eyes. "He really replaced you with that model girl, huh?" Vinny asked, shaking his head. "I told him he was an idiot. You were the only real thing in his life." "He made his choice," Ilara said. "Now you make yours." Vinny took a deep breath. He picked up a dirty jacket from the back of a chair. "All right," he said. "Let's fry the bastard." The Manhattan Criminal Court was a fortress of gray stone and grim faces. But on the day of the People vs. Julian Thorne, it felt more like a movie premiere. News vans clogged the streets. Protesters with signs about corporate greed and environmental justice lined the stairs. Inside courtroom 302, the air was thin with tension. Julian sat at the defense table. The transformation was startling. The billionaire sheen was gone. His skin was sallow, his eyes bloodshot, and his expensive suit hung loosely on a body that had shed 20 pounds from stress. He refused to look at the gallery, where former business associates and high society types whispered behind his back. Ilara sat in the front row behind the prosecution. She wore white, a sleek, elegant suit that signaled innocence and power. She did not look at Julian. She looked at the jury. "The defense calls Julian Thorne to the stand." Julian's lawyer, a high-priced shark named Mr. Sterling, no relation to Arthur, though the irony was lost on no one, announced. Julian stood. He smoothed his tie and walked to the witness stand. He was going to play the role of the misunderstood genius. "Mr. Thorne," his lawyer began softly, "did you intend to commit bigamy?" "Absolutely not," Julian said, his voice firm and practiced. "I am a man of details. I run a global logistics empire. I delegated the divorce proceedings to my cousin Vincent because I wanted to help him. I trusted him. I had no idea he pocketed the money and forged the documents. I have lived the last 5 years believing I was a single man." He looked at the jury, giving a faint, tragic smile. "I fell in love with Tiffany. I wanted to start a family. Why would I risk everything I built for a lie? I am the victim of a family betrayal." The jury seemed to lean in slightly. Julian was charismatic. He was a salesman, and he was selling his innocence well. Then, D.A. Reynolds stood for cross-examination. "Mr. Thorne," she said, walking toward him, "you state that you are a man of details, a man who reviews everything." "I am," Julian said. "You review shipping container manifests in Singapore?" "Yes." "You review the fuel efficiency reports of your jet fleet down to the decimal point?" "Of course, that's good business." "Then," Reynolds said, leaning on the railing, "you expect this jury to believe that a man who reviews the tire pressure of his delivery trucks failed to review the final divorce decree of his own marriage for 5 years?" Julian clenched his jaw. "I trusted my cousin." "Let's talk about your cousin," Reynolds said. "The prosecution calls Vincent Gambino as a rebuttal witness." A murmur rippled through the court. Julian's eyes widened. He hadn't known Vinny was in custody. He thought Vinny was in Mexico. The side door opened, and Vinny walked in, flanked by 2 marshals. He looked cleaned up, wearing a cheap suit Alara had bought him. He sat in the witness chair and pointed a trembling finger at Julian. "Mr. Gambino," Reynolds asked, "did you falsify the divorce papers?" "I did," Vinny said, his voice cracking. "Why?" "Because he told me to," Vinny yelled, looking at Julian. "He called me on November 14th, 2019. I remember the date because it was his birthday. He said, 'Vinny, I need you to make her disappear, but I don't want to split the assets. The company is about to explode. If I divorce her for real, she gets half. Just fake it.'" "Liar!" Julian shouted, leaping from his seat. "You lying druggy crook, I never said that." "Order!" Judge Harrison pounded his gavel. "Sit down, Mr. Thorne. I got proof," Vinny yelled over the noise. "I saved the voicemail. I knew you'd try to screw me one day, Julian. I kept the old phone." The room went into total silence. D.A. Reynolds held up a small evidence bag containing an old, cracked iPhone. "Your Honor, the prosecution would like to play Exhibit Number 4B. The judge nodded. A hush fell over the room as the audio played through the courtroom speakers. The voice was younger, more arrogant, but undeniably Julian's. "Vinny, it's me. Look, don't file the papers. Just stamp it at that store in Chinatown. Stamp them and give them to Alara. She won't check. I need to keep the capital for the IPO next year. Just handle it, and I'll give you $5,000. Don't screw this up. Lick." Julian stood frozen in the witness stand. His face was the color of ash. There was no way to spin this. There was no charm that could undo the sound of his own greed. "Mr. Thorne," D.A. Reynolds said, her voice cold, "you not only committed bigamy, you committed conspiracy to commit fraud, perjury, and grand larceny against your lawful wife. And that is before we even get to the Project Anchor environmental crimes." Julian looked at Alara. For the first time in the trial, he locked eyes with her. He expected to see hatred. He expected to see triumph. But Alara just looked. Done. She looked like someone watching a boring movie reach its predictable end. She stood up, smoothed her skirt, and walked out of the courtroom before the verdict was read. She didn't need to hear it. She knew the ending. 4. The legacy of the Iron Lady. The office that used to be a sanctuary to Julian's ego had been transformed. The dark mahogany was gone, replaced by sleek glass and warm natural light. Julian's portrait had long since vanished. In its place was a large digital world map, glowing with live shipping routes. Elara sat at the desk, reviewing quarterly reports. "Excuse me, Ms. Vance, Madam CEO." Elara looked up. Sarah, the receptionist, was there with a smile. Sarah had kept her job, but Elara had paid for her to take night classes in business management. She was now the executive assistant. "Yes, Sarah. We have the press waiting in the lobby for the rebranding announcement, and there's a letter for you, from upstate." Sarah placed a plain white envelope on the desk. The return address was Otisville Federal Correctional Facility. Elara stared at the envelope. She did not open it. She knew what it would say. It would be a plea. It would be blaming. It would be Julian trying to manipulate her one last time from behind bars, where he was serving the first year of his 25-year sentence. She picked up the letter. "Sarah?" "Yes, ma'am." "Shred this," Elara said, handing it back. "I don't read spam." Sarah smiled. "Understood." Elara stood and walked to the window. Manhattan stretched out beneath her, a grid of infinite possibilities. The company, now renamed Vance Global Logistics, was thriving. She had paid the fines for Julian's crimes, fired the corrupt board members, and instituted a profit-sharing model for employees. The stock was higher than it ever was under Julian, and she was not alone. She had reconnected with old friends. She had taken up painting again. She had even been on a few dates, though she was in no hurry. She thought of Tiffany. The last she heard was that the ex-model had sold the engagement ring, which Elara had legally allowed her to keep as a gesture of pity, to pay her own debts. Karma had come for everyone. Julian had wanted a queen. He just didn't realize he already had one. He was too blinded by the glitter of fake gold to notice the value of the real iron by his side. Elara checked her reflection in the glass. The woman looking back was no longer the plain wife. She was powerful. She was just. And she was free. She turned from the window and walked to the door to face the press. She had an empire to run. So, what did we learn from the downfall of Julian Thorne? Julian made the classic mistake of the arrogant narcissist. He mistook kindness for weakness. He thought because Elara was quiet, she was stupid. He thought because she was loyal, she was submissive. He built a castle on a foundation of lies, assuming the person who held the blueprint would never speak up. But the truth is, the most dangerous person in the room is not the one who shouts or boasts. It's the one who sits quietly, observes everything, and keeps the evidence. Elara didn't just get revenge. She got justice. She proved that dignity and intelligence will always outlast flash and greed. Interactive question. What would you have done in Elara's place? Would you have stormed the party or handled it differently? Let me know your opinion in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of ultimate karma, please hit like. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for a new story. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.